Alright, give me a few seconds here. Make sure everything is working. Think that it is. Give me a few seconds here. Alright, and we're going to go ahead and put out a note on Discord that we are live. Beautiful. Alrighty, so topic of today is God's existence. The big thing let me see here. Alright, it's working fine. The big thing of today is just more God arguments or socialist stuff because, it seems like socialists are not liking me. So if any of them come into the Twitch and get angry at my beliefs, we'll have a conversation with socialists today. The big thing. Oopsie. Shut that off. The big thing today is just going to be continuing to, think of arguments against God's existence, contemplate the good arguments, make sure this looks okay, probably. Probably does. Yeah. But yeah, it's just going to be continuing to think of some different ideas in terms of, what we should do here. Need to see what I wrote yesterday. So this one's kind of a rebuke of, the presuppositionalist thought. And I guess kind of like the socialist thinkers as well. Just why continental thinking or anti-realism is kind of silly. If you ask yourself the question, can I trust my thoughts? If you come to the conclusion you can't trust your thoughts, number one, it should be just automatically absurd to you. Because if you can't trust your thoughts, it doesn't seem like there's a reason to do anything ever at all for any reason. Another thing with it is that that there's just straight up a defeater for that. And that's what this is. The thought that I can't trust my thoughts is a thought. So if you accept the thought, I can't trust my thoughts, that would be trusting that thought. Which would mean that you can trust at least one of your thoughts. If one instance of a thing can occur, the probability of more instances is high. If the probability of a thing being the case is high, rational agent ought to believe it to be so. Rational agent ought to trust in some of their thoughts. And for the people that like to play word games with God, personal pure existence itself is what we're defining it as. Has to be personal, has to be pure existence itself, or in other words, has to have created reality, hold reality together, something of that nature. So examples would be like Allah from the Quran, or Yahweh from the Bible, the Judeo-Christian God. Or another example would be the Brahmin from Hinduism. Any of these, I think, are what we're referring to. You know, if we basically think that a personal entity that's pure existence itself exists, or just some sort of supernatural entity, however you interpret that, that is what we are discussing. So, I think that the general arguments against it are fairly self-evident, but, you know, ultimately people seem to hold on to a lot of different ideas. I think one thing we haven't done is, like, go over kind of the trickier arguments and, like, some of the actually good arguments. So I think we'll do that. So you're gonna have the teleological argument. Particularly fine-tuning argument. Which the fine-tuning argument's gonna basically be like the four fundamental forces are necessary. Four fundamental natural forces are necessary for existence. Why are they the way they are? This argument's tricky, so we need to come up with a written out explanation for that one. We probably also need to come up with something for fine-tuning argument. Consciousness seems to be limited as so far as it is not possible to think of something that no one else can think of. Why would evolution not eventually drive a greater thought process? That one's pretty tricky. I think that these two are ones that are fairly tricky. I guess then we'll do Christology. Christology. Jesus did exist. As a historical person. A few people believed him. A few confirmed, or a few, it might be likely likely a few people. Believed him to be God, and likely Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. These are all caps. And okay. So I think these three are going to be the typical evidential arguments that hold some water. I think that we're kind of needing to write out the problems with these, or why these don't seem convincing on their own, or even all three together. Do this, makes it bigger. Let me zoom in a little. So, I don't know. I think that these ones are probably going to be the good arguments, so I think that we need to explain these in the document and just make sure that these are all good, just to be fair and make sure that our document is well put together, that we're giving acknowledgement to the better arguments for God and such, just to make sure we've covered all of our bases. But yeah, I think that generally the teleological argument and the evidential arguments get a little bit tricky. I do think it is the case that there's no logical argument for God, but there are a couple evidential arguments. So I think that the evidential arguments need addressed. The logical arguments, I don't think hold any water, and I think that there's logical defeaters for God's existence. So, I think that we mostly need to be prepared to talk about evidential arguments, because I think that's where the majority of people have went that do Christian apologetics, just because I think they've realized that a lot of the arguments are not great. Hey, what's up, Chloe6712? Hey, Smithwick Station, what's up? How's it going? How's everyone's day going? Mine's going fantastic. Can't complain. It's a great day. Yeah, I think generally, I think the document's almost done. I think we just gotta take care of the evidential arguments. Good. Well, I'm glad to hear it, Chloe. Every day is a good day. So, glad to hear it. But yeah, I think, I think we got the logical arguments down in the document, most of them. I think those are ready to go into the Discord. But, yeah, I basically think that there's no logical grounding for God. But we do need to address the evidential arguments, I think. So, we got to write those out in the document. We got to write down a little bit of Christology views, I think, and stuff like that. Because, yeah, it does get a little bit tricky. It does seem to be the case that even like Bart Ehrman, which would be like your secular scholar, would agree that Jesus did exist. And I believe you would have like Peter and whoever wrote the Q source that Matthew, Mark, and Luke used likely believed Jesus was God as well. So there's stuff there, and also reporting that Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist would be very odd to do if it was made up, because it would be generally have considered like likely embarrassing for some of the original like Jewish church and early Christian Jewish church to admit that like if they're supposed to be like this super holy person, why would they get baptized by someone less holy? Like that was a embarrassing thing. So like if you baptized a priest or preacher, you would need to, or like a rabbi, you would have to be higher up in the church to do that. Because if not, it would be embarrassing. So I think those are some interesting things. It at least brings a tiny bit of credibility to the Q source that Matthew, Mark, and Luke used to write their Gospels. Or whoever wrote Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Whatever that source material was. It would bring some credibility to it, because it's really weird to explain like what's supposed to be your Son of God as being baptized, so that would certainly not make sense if they were just not convinced or lying. But outside of that, I think that there's some other problems with it. I think the most glaring issue is just going to be what we knew about Romans and Greeks and a lot of ancient civilizations, is that they were very much might makes right and had a power dynamics view of the world. I think that the Romans not parading around that they killed like this Jewish leader, rabble rouser Jesus, would have been very, very odd for the Romans. So that's a little bit strange that the Romans, we don't have evidence they like paraded around the death of the, like, supposedly would have been like the cause of the early Jewish Christian church. That's really odd. Hey, Princess Peach. How's it going? Yeah, I think that generally I guess the main refutation for the evidential arguments is just that they're little in comparison to the other arguments you can make, but they are something, so it's something there worth talking about. It's at least interesting. I don't know. I think the thing we were talking about yesterday, I think was kind of interesting, that agency can't coexist with God. I think that's kind of an interesting idea. I think we need to look more into that, but I don't know. I think that the document's mostly done, so if anyone gets in the Discord and uses it, I think it's sufficient for use now. I think that we've got quite a few arguments made up. Yeah, I'll probably post that in both streaming sides, because if anyone has any contentions, they can feel free to let me know what they disagree with. Hopefully we get one of our philosophy friends in here that can let me know if they reject or accept some of these syllogisms. I think a lot of them are good. I can't think of like a super solid defeater against the time argument, but I don't know. I think the biggest thing is going to be the view of suffering, though. I think I've gotten it written up a decent bit. I think that the problem of suffering, I think the biblical view is silly. I think both the prophetic view and apocalyptic views are just not good. Like, I think either way, I think you could reject them by going like full Calvinist and like basically we're pawns of God and we literally do everything that God says, but that would seem to not be coinciding with agency or free will. Seems to be pretty silly. But I don't know. Ultimately, I think our arguments are solid now. So I think the next thing we got to do is start building the socialist document, because it seems like socialists are not liking me right now. So we need to. We're probably going to end up in a conversation with more socialists, I would guess. So more people that think money was made by the white man, probably. So I don't know. We'll have to figure that shit out. Actually, we'll probably start on that document today, because I think that we're going to inevitably run into someone that gets pissy at our anti-socialist takes. So probably need to be prepared for that. So we need to make a new document, and it needs to be arguments against socialism. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just not really convinced by like the continental philosophers and like the socialist philosophers. I think that they're just silly. Like, I think the original writings by Karl Marx, I could still like respect Marx a little bit, because he still like accepted the concept of agency, and it was one of his fundamental axioms was dialectical materialism, and he was essentially like in the mindset of, as agents, we're going to make decisions that benefit us as agents. So I can get behind that. I think that it's a little bit too oversimplified, but there's some things to keep in mind there, that this whole money thing could be a little bit corrupting. So you have to be a little bit careful, not letting bad people, reach super high positions of power and such. But the arguments of a classless, moneyless society are just silly to me. I think that it's just disputed with mimetic evolution. I think that if societies could function properly, classless and moneyless, then we would have already seen them, or they would have already beaten out the less good classed and moneyed societies. And I have no reason to think that a moneyless society works. It's probably quite crap. There's a reason why we developed it, right? I mean, you could think of the famous apple tree and mango tree example that like John Locke gave for his contractionism view. If you and your neighbor, you have an apple tree and they have a mango tree, in a state of nature or like a very early economy, your only way to like fairly get apples, or to fairly get the mangoes, and for your neighbor to fairly get the apples, you would have to trade each other for them. So if you ever need like a big bushel of apples, you have to lug over a big thing of mangoes to the person, give them that, trust that they're not going to beat you over the head and just take your mangoes. And then take the apples. So we eventually developed coinage, so that way I can just go get the apples, give you something objectively valuable, like a piece of gold or silver, and you can come get like apples or mangoes for me whenever you want. It just seems better than not having it, so I think it's just silly to suggest otherwise. I don't know. Just not quite convinced of the whole socialism thing. I think it's silly. I think that in general, like, money's inevitable, right? A society without money is just less efficient than a society with money. And same thing, fiat currency, I think, was inevitable because at some point, or just like debt-based bank notes were inevitable, and like mercantile capitalism was inevitable because at some point, if I wanted to ship in a massive economy, bring you huge amounts of different goods, I would have to ship them overseas to you first, which could take months, and then get paid for them. So, and then I have to ship all the goods immediately back versus I could just go with an empty ship, pick up all the goods, give you a bunch of gold and silver, or give you a banknote requiring that I eventually pay you, or I have to give it back to a merchant or port where I'm going and receive the goods I want to receive. So yeah, I think it was just inevitable. And I think fiat currency is the same way because in modern society, like if a mega corporation needs $1 billion worth of banknote or money or US dollars, whatever the currency is going to end up being in whatever society, you need, that company oftentimes needs it now to make the economy grow and create more jobs and to keep things going. And if the bank has to scramble to get a bunch of stuff to give it to them, then they're inevitably going to have issues or they're not going to be able to get the money fast enough. So you're just going to end up with money eventually. It's just more efficient. So I don't know. I just reject that socialist view. I think it's a little bit silly. Like, you're not going to have a moneyless society no matter how hard you try. It's just going to suck. You're going to have to lug your, if I want to go get a pair of shoes, I'm going to need to lug a sheep or chicken or something over to go buy a pair of Nikes. It's just stupid. You're going to have money to do it eventually. You can't drive around in your car with 80 bushels of apples or whatever to trade. It just doesn't make sense. Money was just inevitable. I don't know. I guess the other argument is, well, you just give it all over to the government or just society just divvies up everything, but like seems extremely inefficient as well because now you're into the problem of like resource distribution, who gets what and why. And then you're going to have to trust a central body with that. Or you could just have a true anarchist society and every man for himself just steal everything. But that's obviously garbage, and eventually you're going to redevelop society with it. So it's how come every anarchist in existence ends up magically recreating liberal governments again when you ask them simple questions. So it's just going to develop again. So yeah, that part of socialism I think's dumb. And then also the classless society. I have no reason to think as long as we're agents, we won't have class, because class is just the societal representation of hierarchy or basically societal reasoning. So like, if you have a bunch of agents that can freely make decisions in nature, inevitably some agents are going to make the decision to get a good that all the other agents find valuable, and it's going to inevitably make them a little bit more valuable. Like, even if we're in a society like, even in like a tribalistic society, if we're all starving because we weren't able to get a good harvest or get berries, like you're a really well trained hunter is going to inevitably be a bit more valuable to the society at that time. Um, and you could argue like, well, people shouldn't think like that, but I don't see how you don't, because your reasoning skills are going to inevitably lead you to thinking some things are more important than others. So I don't know. I guess I just don't see a good way that you're going to get a classless society either. Classless and moneyless, I think, is silly. I think you could create a fairer society, and a society with as many rights as possible, I think, is the case. But I think that you're inevitably going to still have class in a fair society, and you're still going to inevitably have money in a fair society. That's the only part that I accept of Karl Marx, is that, okay, maybe we just got to be careful of people getting too much money. Because if they do, they can corrupt others or like do bad things, or at least make sure bad people can't end up with a lot of money. Makes sense to me. But yeah, I don't know. It's just not very convincing to me. Seems like the socialists don't like my belief system, I guess. I don't know. I got called a right-wing jack-off the other day, so which just is false. But yeah, I guess that's the two main ops at this point. It's going to be the socialist ops and the probably like the Christian ops seem to be the main people at this point. But I really don't know. I mean, it wasn't really originally the point of the show was to like be innately oppositional, but it seems to have just happened. People get faced with ideologies they don't like and then freak out. So, I don't know. I don't think I'm too convinced of socialism. I think it's just silly. So that's going to be another thing we'll probably have dedicated streams about. And also probably the abortion argument and such as well, but we'll have to see. We'll have to see. I think that generally the arguments are going to be mostly with the religious crowd and the socialist crowd for a while. Probably they seem to be the main ops, so we'll deal with them. We'll deal with them at some point. Oh, I think I need to get some paper ready, probably. I don't know, though. Okay. But yeah, I'm not really convinced by this whole socialist thing, so we'll also open that up as well. Because yeah, I think it's just silly in some respects, but I don't know. I think generally there's not good arguments for it, but the main thing, you can look at that document and let me know if you disagree with anything in that. Yeah, I think that generally, I think that's generally the case, that people tend to just reach ideas they don't like and then freak out. I don't know. I think people tend to hold their ideas as like a part of themselves, which I think is fair. Like, I think you should take some pride or ego in your reasoning. I think it's a part of intellectualism. But being beholden to it and like taking it personal, like it's like your whole world falling apart, if you engage with a new ideology, is just insane. Right? The world's a place filled with crazy people. You gotta deal with crazy ideologies. It's just the fact of the matter. And those same crazy people, the people that you think are crazy, are probably thinking the same thing about you. So if you run around thinking everything people say is a personal attack or whatever, then you're just going to live a sad life. You got to get up and do stuff with your life. And I think that's a big issue in society in general, is like, I think people have a really bad view of freedom of speech. I think that they're thinking that it's like freedom from consequences. I think generally people are like too sensitive now. On both sides. I mean, you can see the MAGA movement get furious and pissy at everything and try to get people canceled or kicked off air, like what they did with Jimmy Kimmel and stuff. And, you know, if you're going to go out and say stuff, I mean, you know, I think when even this country was first founded, I mean, when it was literally founded on revolution, like, pretending that you're going to go out and everyone has to treat you like innately respectfully, I think is just an absurd thought. I think, in fact, I think our country would be better off if we can scream at each other, tell each other that we're stupid, full of shit, and then we could be like, all right, you want to go get a beer? Like, I don't know where that went. Like, we really do need to, like, be able to have tough conversations. Be like, no, I think your ideology is fundamentally wrong things are bad for the world, so I think you're believing in a very, very bad thing. So fuck you, you know. But afterwards, you could be like, okay, whatever. Let's go hang out. Like, don't take things so personally. I think it's kind of killing society. I think it's mostly the internet. It's just kind of ruined us a little bit. I think we've gotten used to, like, being able to just learn ideologies in our head and not engage with anything. So that's the main point. What I'm trying to do is just make sure people are rational. Because if we had a rational left and right in the United States and the world, it would be a much better place. And like, I don't think ancient Greece worked the way that it did, or the United States worked for so long. Because we all just, like, you know, got angry at each other. Like, I think we were angry at each other's ideas, but, like, we kept it to the ideas, you know. And if the ideas were fundamentally bad enough, I mean, we fought a civil war. I mean, we fought a revolution to get our way. So it's just odd. People are just, like, too sad and weak anymore. They just kind of, like, sit around, cry about stuff instead of actually getting anything done. I don't know. I think it's just absurd. I think you ought to be willing to engage with ideas you disagree with. Oops. I don't know. Yeah. I think that's a fundamental problem. I really think the big problem in society is anti-intellectualism, though. Like, I watch people online, like, the amount of times walking around now that I hear, I believe it just because I believe it. It's getting really annoying and absurd. Like, I think people are just kind of like listening to their head and their thoughts and aren't like having an inner dialogue or testing it, and they aren't willing to test it against anyone else. So it's like they have no way of verifying it at all. So I don't know. We'll have to see going forward. Maybe things will get better. Hopefully, I can help make them better, and we can expose the anti-intellectuals and the silly people. But I don't know. I think people just need to stop freaking out so much generally. Ugh, go away. But yeah, I don't know. And something else I need to do, I need to like I need to make like some shorts and like a YouTube video on the trades. I think that a lot of people have a lot of misunderstanding about trades, and a lot of people are being like anti-educational right now, or like, oh, go become a plumber, electrician, HVAC tech, sheet metal worker, whatever. And I just don't think they understand what that means. I think that they need to like have a realistic expectation of what they're telling people. Like, I hear wild numbers thrown around for the trades. Like, I personally work in the trades. I'm a plumber. I also have some HVAC experience as well. I plan on dual trading, so like, once I get my plumbing master license, I'm gonna go probably do some sheet metal work for a while and get my HVAC license. But I think people just have a misunderstanding of how much people make in the trades. Like, there is a subsection of people that can make very, very good money. But what I'll tell you about the trades is that either they pay extremely well or they pay crap. There's like no in between. And I'm going to tell you the jobs that pay very, very well, that skew the numbers up, are going to be residential service, like plumbers, HVAC techs, and even like electricians. They are going to be driving up the cost of your trade, or like the average hourly pay, by a lot. Because some of the like HVAC sales reps and like estimators and stuff, they all make like, some of the top earners can make like 300,000 a year, like 400,000 a year. Like, they make as much as like a doctor makes. But like the install techs, I mean, depending on what state you're in, I feel like even if we take a high inflation state like California, as an install tech in residential, because it's typically considered less dangerous and easier, you're probably only making like 40 to 60 an hour, even in a high inflation state. In an average state, like my state of Ohio, I think you're probably going to make 30, 35 maybe, which, if you think about what that is, if you get your full 40 hours every week, which the industry is very hit or miss. Like, some weeks you're going to work like 70 hours. Some weeks you're going to work like 20 because you only sold a couple installs that week. Or your estimator only got you a couple installs and the rest were all service. So the install crews are dead and can't make any money. So, yeah, I think you're probably going to average your 40, maybe if you're lucky and work at a company that can bring in that much work consistently. But more realistically, you're going to average like 38 hours a week, unless you get like a really, really good company and you like dual trade or specialize in multiple things. So you're service tech and installer. Because if you're a service tech and installer, you could do service when it's slower and install when it's busy and install. So it just ultimately depends. I think people put out these outrageous numbers of like, oh, they're making well into the six figures. It's like, no. Like 20% or less are. The remaining 80% are struggling to survive like everyone else. And like sometimes you would be better off working at like Amazon or UPS or something than you would being in the trades just throwing boxes. So I mean the unions are kind of an exception, but not every state has good strong unions. Only up where I am has really good strong unions. If you're down south, you probably don't have them. So your pay is going to be really bad, even in the unions. It's going to be like 30 an hour for a plumber and 32 for an electrician or something. Which is like, in modern era for the average inflation area, 30 an hour is like the minimum to like be on track to retire at a decent age. And you probably won't afford a nice house ever with that. You might be able to get a fixer-upper with 30 an hour in most areas. Of course, there's really low income areas you could go to, like the middle of the Rocky Mountains and Tennessee, or like around Gatlinburg or Pigeon Forge or something, or out in the middle of West Virginia, sure. But to the average area in the United States where most people live, not the case. And if you live in one of those areas, there's probably way fewer jobs available in general for that stuff. Because a lot of the people living in those areas don't have the money to pay you, so they're fixing stuff themselves, or you got to charge really cheap. So, if you're a plumber there, you could probably only charge like $75 an hour, $100 maybe, versus if you're in an average inflation area, you could charge $150, $200. And people will be there to afford it. And like same thing with like pretty much any of the trades are going to follow the same pattern. So I don't know. I think people just have unrealistic expectations, and they also don't account for you have to buy a lot of your own tools, and some of the trades are very expensive. Like if you become a mechanic, that's exorbitantly expensive. A lot of the mechanics I know are paying off tool debt for their entire lives. Like it's very difficult to buy tools for mechanics because there's so many different things to work on, so many different models of vehicles. Plumbers have a lot of expensive tools if you're going to be a service plumber, because you also have to have drain equipment, which like a jetter can be like $70,000. I mean, it's exorbitantly expensive. And if your company makes you buy your own like sewer cameras, or makes you finance them or lease them from them, I even know of a plumbing company that makes you buy your own vehicles. Like, you have to provide your own company truck. I mean, it's just stuff people don't think about. And yet there are people out here like, oh, go get into the trades or whatever. I think they're just full of shit. I mean, I don't think they would ever work those jobs a day in their life, and yet they're out here talking about it. So it just upsets me, because as someone that does that type of work, I mean, it's like, no. It's just not what you're making it out to be. The only way you get really high pay is you have to be super specialized, super knowledgeable. You have to be like the best of the best, or you have to go into sales and be a solid salesperson. You got to sell tankless water heaters to elderly women, and you have to be able to sleep with yourself at night doing that. So that's just not going to be the majority of people. It's very few, right? I mean, the issue with the average pay is it's probably taking people that make $50,000 and people making 150 and averaging them out to get 100 or 95 or whatever the average turns out to be. It's just the people on the upper end are skewing it. So just keep that in mind. Don't let people trick you into that nonsense. I think that it's just kind of silly. But ultimately, I don't know. Pays the bills is what it is. I think generally people can make what they're going to make and do what they're going to do. I don't know. Excuse me. Ooh. Give me 2 seconds. But yeah, I don't know. I think people are kind of sucking on that front. They need to stop saying stuff they don't know about. That made my camera go crazy. Stupid thing. But yeah, I think that generally the what do I think about the cosmological argument? Yeah, so the cosmological argument I think falls apart fairly fast for God's existence. I think that it falls apart to eternalism. So, oh, come on, camera. So basically what eternalism is it's just the fact that the universe has always existed, or at least like the cosmos have always existed. It makes the cosmological argument void. So basically the cosmological argument, there's either the creation version or like the Kalam version, which is like, you know, changes, all changes have cause. So if you follow it back enough, you're going to have an uncaused causer. So an uncaused cause, essentially. And then you're going to follow the universal argument or the creation argument back. Everything appears to be created or has a reason for existence. So you follow it back. There has to be an unreasonable reason or like just self-evident reason. And I think these things are like somewhat true. I think that they're true at first like glance, but I don't think that they are like long-term good. Like, I don't know how I'm going to say this. If the universe always existed, these just fall apart. Like if there's no quote-unquote beginning, if it's just always approaching a beginning point and never actually reaches it, so there's like a lower implied limit to reality in like time and everything within it, then yeah, that would disprove the cosmological argument, because then no, there's not a first causer, right? So, and then the burden of proof would be on you to be like, okay, how do you know that the universe always existed, or the cosmos always existed, or realities always existed? You know, you could prove the ability for things to exist have always existed, or to be actual has always existed. And there's actually a really good argument for that, because the state of affairs in which things cannot be actual would have to be actual in order for things to not be actual. So I know that sounds like a lot of words, but like basically it would have to be the case that things didn't exist in order for things not to exist. So yeah, that would be an actual state of affairs, so therefore it's always existed. You can do the same thing with time. Time is just the axis in which things change. So change is dependent on time. Anywhere where change occurs, time occurs, which would mean that the actual state of affairs of time not existing would have to go from false to true, which means that time would have to be present for that to change. So time always existed. And space must have always existed because if things didn't have the ability to be plotted on vectors, it's not clear how they would suddenly go from not being plottable on a vector to being plottable on a vector. So you would have to prove the mechanism for which how that would occur. So yeah, I will be right back. All right, I'm back. What was that last question? Oh yeah, the cosmological argument. Yeah, I think that it's rejected through eternalism. I don't think that I think that the universe just always existed. So the cosmological argument only makes sense if it didn't always exist. So I think that yeah, I think there's evidence to suggest that some things have always existed. For instance, time has always existed, space has always existed, and the ability for things to be actual have always existed, which are all properties of the universe. So, in the broader cosmos and reality. So, all these things must have always existed. So, now maybe matter didn't always exist, but certainly, like, the fabric of reality was always there, or space itself was always there, or just the map in which you can map coordinates was always there. Which actually, I need to put that argument in. I completely forgot about that argument into the document here. Let's do that. Give me a second here. Okay, let's map this sucker on. So you're gonna basically, what is this, argument 10? Yep. 10. Space has always existed. Proposition 1. To know if there is something present. Hold on. Let's do proposition 1, proposition 2, conclusion. So we need a syllogism here. So proposition 1 is going to be if the fact that there are no things present on a map of anything is true, then there must be a map present to determine nothing is present. On the map. If the fact that there are no things present on a map of anything is true, then this implies the map is present to have nothing on. If there was no matter in space, space is a map of things I guess space is a map of reality. If no matter was in space, then you... Actually, I don't need a third proposition. That just follows a conclusion. Space always existed even if matter didn't. Matter or energy didn't. Yeah. Does that screw up the rest of the document? It doesn't look like it. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the gist. Like, if you, let me find it again. So it's going to be argument 10. Yep, I think space has always existed. I think it's impossible for it to not exist, because to know that matter didn't exist would imply that there's a space in which matter can be mapped. If the space wasn't present, or the map to map matter wasn't present, then you wouldn't know that matter didn't exist. So yeah, I think that there's just things, and then obviously you have actualization. You have time. Time always existed because in order for time to come into existence, the proposition time does not exist would need to change from true to false. All changes to all states of affairs occur within time. Time not existing is a state of affairs. Time has always existed. Therefore, God didn't create it. There's also the actualization argument. The ability for things to be actual must have always existed. Therefore, God did not create all of reality. In order for things to not be actual, the state of affairs in which nothing can be actual must be the case. All states of affairs that are the case are actual. Reality has always possessed the ability to make things actual, therefore God didn't make it that way. So, I mean, there's just a couple parts of our cosmos or universe or reality that just could never not be. And I think it defeats the cosmological argument. So, yeah, I think that, and I also think that, like, a necessitarian view defeats the cosmological problem, because if everything is just necessary, then things just are at that point. There's not like, oh, these things were created. They just had to be the way that they are. There's no other way they could be. So it's not like they were created. They just exist the way that they are because they have to exist that way. So they're just simply actual. So I think the creation model is defeated pretty much right away. P2 is bad definition, since notion of map needs notion of space. Non sequitur. If time always existed, that doesn't imply that God didn't create it. It necessarily does. In modern cosmology, time has a beginning in the Big Bang singularity. If we speak about scientific time, non-physical one, whatever it is, if non sequitur. If time has always existed, that doesn't imply that God didn't create it. It necessarily does. Because if it's always been there, there was never a point which it could have been created. Well, I suppose you could argue God's outside of time, but in order to argue God's outside of time, I don't think that holds water. I think God would necessarily have to be temporal. He would have to be beholden to time, which means that he can't create it. I think that there's an argument for that. I think that either God was creating or God was always creating. If God was always creating, then it was never... So it's argument against your own definition of God. Well, it's not my own definition of God, it's the definition of God, at least the Judeo-Christian definition, the Hindu definition, and the Muslim definition, because they're all going to give you some variation of pure existence itself or reality itself. The Judeo-Christian tradition's going to hold God to be like a personal entity. There is no definition of God. Different theologists give different definitions. Okay, I see. Well, you could do the postmodernist thing all you want. Whatever you think I mean when I say the word God is what I mean. I think this postmodernist stuff is crap. I just reject your fundamental belief. I think it's full of shit. I think words have references. And I think the reference people mean when they say the word God is a thing. I think it's people are referring to a personal entity that's responsible for existence itself. And I mean, I guess if you want evidence of that, Thomas Aquinas defined it that way. Augustine defined it in a similar manner. A lot of the Muslim thinkers cringe goodbye. Yeah, I would run from this conversation if I were you as well. I accept your intellectual defeat. Because, yeah, I mean, this just shows people keep trying this in the stream, right? Postmodernism's stupid. So you could try the Jordan Peterson crap all you want. Words have meaning. If you want to reject that words have meaning, and you want to like start playing word games and, well, what do you mean by the word God? What do you mean by the word what? What do you mean by the word is? You could do that if you want, and I know you think that makes you sound smart, but it just makes you sound really stupid. Because I did that too for a little bit. That's what made me turn to become like a socialist and do all these stupid stuff at one point, because I read a little bit of Derrida and I was like, oh, I can, words are just historical. Words are just different because they're not other words. Like, no, there's a meaning to things. If I say the word God, I'm referring to pure existence itself, and it's personal in nature. We've been defining that way for thousands of years, so even Derrida would look at you and be like, why are you being so pedantic? So, argue about words all you want, it just shows that you don't have any substance, so just keep that in mind. I did the same thing too. I don't like hold it against people that try to be postmodernist or like deconstructionist or structuralist or whatever, but you know, that seems to be the most common argument I get anymore, is just people, instead of trying to argue about the substance of words, just go, words don't exist, or what do you mean by the word the, what do you mean by the word what do you mean by the word is? They just turn it all into word games. And it's like, I think even like the continental philosophers you're basing that off of understood what they were saying wasn't 100% literal, or like, I think even they understood some of the things they were saying were like contextual, not fact of the matter. So, yep. I don't know what people's obsession with this is. I don't know if it's like the Jordan Peterson line of argument and like, well, the word God transcends, 20 civilizations, and what I don't think atheists actually know what they mean when they say the word God. It's like, okay. Or you're just defining God. It's like, no, words have references. There's a concept I'm talking about. You can engage with that concept or you can play word games. You're the one defining at that point, not me. I could clearly define any word if you'd like it defined. So, I have it written down. Definition of God, personal pure existence itself, which, if you want to reject that Christians don't hold that view, or Muslims, or whoever, they all do. Even Hindus hold that about the Brahman. So, yeah, I don't know. I would run to if I had these ideologies. I mean, those ideologies only work if you run into someone that hasn't thought for more than 2 seconds and like, oh no, when I say a word, the word actually has a reference. So, I get it. I get it. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the goals of this channel is to stop this intellectual crap. People try to sound smart and then they're like, well, what do you mean by the word the? What do you mean by the word does? What do you mean by the word God? No. But yeah, I mean, that's how easy it is to defeat continental thinking. Just define your words and be like, it's whatever you think it means. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's just stupid. It's silly. I feel like a lot of it stemmed from Jordan Peterson. It's crazy how much damage he's done to our society. Like, actually thinking it's intellectual to be like, what does the word the mean? What does the word does mean? I don't know. These have references. I mean, think about the reference I'm saying, not the word. Unless you reject references, which if that's the case, the phrase words have no references means nothing. Because the word the word words have, none of those reference anything. I don't know what you're saying. So, yeah, I think when people say God, there is a thing that they're thinking of, which is a personal entity, right? Pretty much the entities in every major religion are personal. So if someone hears the word God, they're going to think personal, and then typically every single God's going to be some type of existence itself. So they created existence, they hold existence together, they connect us in some spiritual way, right? There's some embodiment of it. There's some sort of all-powerful being. They all are going to think of that same thing. That's the reference said. You could say that word, and 1,000 years from now, if the English language didn't exist, whatever the future language would be able to figure out what you mean. So, I don't know. People just need to stop doing this stuff where they do the stupid postmodernist crap. They really do. Just getting old. What do you mean by the word the? What do you mean by the word and? I mean, yeah, if that's your only argument against God is that it's just a man-made term, I grant that. I grant your God is all in your head. I'll grant that. So, because at that point you can't have any reference to reality, and we're probably arguing about air, oxygen leaving in our lungs. It's no point to it anyway, so I'll grant that to you. I think it's basically like a roundabout way to be religious. It's kind of like an evasion way of like, deep down inside these things are stupid, but you're trying to get away from having to deal with it by just being like, well, the words themselves, what the hell do you mean by that? basically pulling an ultimate Jordan Peterson move. What does the word God mean? What does the word does mean? What does the word not mean? What does the word exist mean? It's like, these have references. You know what they mean. If you'd like them defined, I can define them for you. And I can demonstrate that that's how they've been used. If you're going to use the stupid Derrida model and be like, well, it has to be used historically, well, here's Thomas Aquinas using it that way. Here's the members, whoever translated the Bibles, using it that way in the King James Version and the New International Version and the English translations of the Quran. So clearly all these historians and translators view it that way. So if you'd like to play Derrida's game and be like, well, your words only mean words because they're historical, well, I can even do that in your worldview if you'd like. So yeah, it's just silly. I don't know. I feel like everyone reads one philosopher like Derrida or something, and then they go like, oh, I'm a genius. I've got it all figured out. Things mean nothing. That's the answer. All these arrogant Western philosophers thinking they've got it all figured out. And yet you're being the arrogant one by just being like, I can say what I want and it means nothing. Okay. Cool, bro. It's like the second one in a row, and it happens a lot on Twitch too. I don't know. I feel like a lot of it's like New Age Christianity too, because a lot of them have abandoned like traditional, like Western philosophy. A lot of them have realized that you can't actually logically prove God, so they just either go play word games or they like, or they become presuppositionalists. And they basically argue brute facts or moot facts. Like how Van Til did. They're just kind of like, you don't actually reason your way to a brute fact. Brute facts are just things you made up. It's like, cool, bro. I don't believe that you believe that, but if you say so. I mean, there's just a simple defeating question for this, too. If God didn't exist, would you be able to trust the thought that God didn't exist? Or another way of putting it that's even more concrete is, if God did not exist, would the proposition that God does not exist be true? And you're inevitably going to have to say no to that, and it's just absurd. It's like God's not true, but he probably is, are true, or is not true. Like, it just doesn't follow. But I don't know. It is what it is. I mean, I used to kind of at least think I was a postmodernist and kind of hold this same view. But ultimately, you got to sit down and think, and once you start thinking hard, I mean, you're going to eventually find things that are just self-evidently the case. Like the not operator in logic. Like, you're not going to be able to get rid of the word not. Because in order for the not operator to not exist, you would need the word not to say that it does not exist. So it must exist. Like, you can find things like this to be the case. And if you start saying, well, I just make these things up, or these are just words that your ancestors said, and so you're just saying it, you don't know what that means, it's like, okay, bud, if you say so. Whatever the hell that means. And if that's the case, when you say words are just historical things, I don't know what that means. Because the word the is not grounded in ancient history. I don't know. It's fucking stupid. But yeah. I don't know. These people, like, they all fall apart with the same questioning, where it's like, you just simply say, nope, your words have references. And that's all they got every time. So, I don't know. I think it's just silly. I think people need to stop doing it. I think it's a big problem right now. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I think it's just silly. I think that it is just silly. Please, no advertisements. No advertisement, please. Yeah, I think that, I don't know. I think these things are just silly. I just don't see how they can be the case. I think there's just foundational things that are true. Like, I mean, if you want to argue otherwise, I don't know. I guess you must at least believe that words convey something, otherwise you wouldn't have no reason to tell me that you don't think words don't convey anything. Because the words you just used don't mean anything. Oh shit, my bad. Drop some. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's just silly, in my opinion. So it is what it is, though. But yeah, anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, the cosmological argument. Yeah, I think eternalism defeats it. I don't know. I think if things have always existed, then God can't have created them, because either that would mean that God has always been creating, or God has created. If God has always been creating, then there's never, uh, it's never the case that it's created. He's just creating. Um, and then if it's the case that um, um, God has created, it would just mean that time existed before God, because God was able to do something, which means that God existed after time, or at least God began creating after time. So yeah, I don't know. I think that yeah, I think that the cosmological argument just falls apart. I think if you want me to give you a good faith um, reply as to what like a good argument for God's existence is, I think you're going to find that logically there is none, but like evidentially, I think that there's some tricky arguments. Certainly, I think that I think that generally that. Hold on, I'm looking at something, which is why I lost my train of thought there. I think that there's a few tricky evidential arguments for God's existence. So, an example would be the teleological argument, and it's going to be the argument from fine tuning. It's kind of weird that we have the four natural forces and they just are there and they work. We don't have a unifying force for them yet. And even if we did have a unifying force, the question would be what caused the unifying force? Or was it just always there? And we wouldn't even logically be able to like deduce that it's always been there or that it was created. So it's certainly tricky. It's a fact of the universe that's seems currently unanswerable, and it seems like it might be forever held within philosophy. I don't know if we'll see it in science. So at the bare minimum, there's something to that. It's basically evidence that you won't find evidence of the fundamental force that guides all forces or anything like that, which gets kind of tricky. Um, I think it's enough on its own to be like, okay, something weird about the universe is the case, or just parts of the universe have always been here. and it seems kind of odd. Another argument is consciousness. I think consciousness is tricky. Um, if we expected consciousness to purely be natural, I would also expect it to be like withheld to evolution. And it seems like human history, like we've been able to translate all the writings we found. And it seems like there are universal concepts that consciousness reaches that has not changed. Like there's no concept you can think of that would be incomprehensible to someone in the future. So you basically can't create a thingless thought or a thought with no reference. Like even if you started speaking gibberish, the gibberish you're saying is going to relate back to something. Even if the relation back to the thing is just it's an amalgamation of random sounds you've heard before, then there's still a thing referenced. So that gets really strange because you would imagine if evolution was the case, like that consciousness is beholden to it if it's natural. So why hasn't consciousness developed into something different yet? Like why haven't we come up with concepts that 1,000 years in the future we're not going to understand? Or like why in the past did they not have concepts that we can't understand now because they require a lower level of consciousness? Seems kind of odd. It would kind of suggest that consciousness is fixed, which could suggest one of two things. Either something supernatural is going on, or I would argue it could be a sign of like a psychophysical law of the universe. But either one of those you're going to struggle to find true evidence for, in my opinion. But at the bare minimum, it's something weird going on, like some type of panpsychism or like innate consciousness in particles or something crazy. I think that gets kind of tricky. So yeah, I mean, there's a couple good faith arguments you can make, and also Christology gets a little bit tricky from Christians because Jesus likely did exist, and he likely was baptized by John the Baptist, and there would be no reason for them to include that. So it doesn't make sense that whatever Q source that the first three Gospels were referring to just made it up. So that would be weird. So it'd be weird to just lie and basically say this God or whatever is like been baptized, because that was typically embarrassing in the early Christian church and Jewish church. Typically, you had to be holier than someone else or higher up in order to baptize someone. So it would be kind of weird to like include that if you were just making up Jesus and John the Baptist all together. That's a wild story. It would be sort of like saying like I don't even know what a good example is, but like when you're trying to prove that you didn't rob a bank, you said, well, I had a giant sack of money that I walked out with from that bank like 100 or like 2 minutes after the bank was supposedly robbed. It's like, well, that's a really weird fact to throw in. So yeah, I mean, it's either like it truly is bogus, or like they saw something happen. So, or somehow they knew that fact, because it's a very weird thing to include. So, yeah, I think there's a few tricky things like that, but I think the ultimate response. God, if this is a scam call, give me like 2 seconds. Okay. Where was I? Oh yeah, I think that the ultimate thing with the evidential arguments are going to be just. I think if you're going to resort to evidential arguments, I think we tend to find things convincing based on a preponderance of evidence. So I just don't think that the preponderance of evidence points to God's existence. I think it points to the opposite. So I guess that's the only rebuke of it, which is what makes it tricky. And it's at least worth a discussion of discussing all the evidence and comparing it. So I think it makes it worth it, is basically what it does. So yeah, it'd be sort of like the equivalent in science if someone comes up with a new idea, they have a little bit of evidence for it, but it basically makes it worth talking about and continuing to study and make sense of. So, yep. So there you go. That's your answer. If you want like the best arguments or like best argument for God, it's going to be your evidential arguments and probably the theological argument. But logical arguments are not going to hold, but your evidential ones, yeah. There's some good ones in there. And they're certainly worth looking into, and I think you have to if you're an atheist. So I think you need to weigh them against all your observations, for sure. So it's at least worth some time to look into. For sure. But yeah, I think that, yeah. I don't know. I think that's the big thing. So just answering your question, I think that's, I think the cosmological argument is rebuked by eternalism, and I think that your best argument, if you're genuinely looking for one or genuine in good faith, I think evidential arguments are where the conversation is, and that's how come you see your most like influential speakers right now are mostly using evidential arguments. Like whoever the hell it is it like John Nettle, the like preacher dude that goes on campuses, uses Christology a lot. It's just like the best thing that you have if you're Christian. Or the other option is to adopt anti-intellectualism, which is unfortunately what a lot of people are doing, and that's kind of what I'm trying to stop. So, because, once you accept like presuppositionalism or like any of the weird continental philosophies, it just gets wacky. And I don't even really believe that you believe that God exists at that point. I think you're just like a pseudo-atheist that wants to sound religious for some reason. So, because if you really don't think that there's facts of the matter or reality that we can know, then I don't understand how you would be religious. Because the fact of the matter that God exists wouldn't be a fact of the matter to you. Or at least you wouldn't believe that it's a fact of the matter to you. So I guess I'm just not very convinced at that point. But yeah, I seem to be getting a lot of those types of people, a lot of precepts and stuff. And I mean, if you're considering this type of ideology, I mean, you could ask yourself a simple question. If you're like going full on like continental mode and more of like an atheist continental thinker, you could just ask yourself the question of, can I trust my thoughts? Or can I trust at least one of my thoughts? Hey, what's up, Reclusi? How's it going? But yeah, I think that there's some issues with logical arguments. I think your evidential ones are where you're going to find, and I think the adoption of like full-on I'm doing great. Yep. I am. Life is good. Life is great. Been getting back into learning music again, playing piano, reading a bunch. I don't know. It's cool. Can't really complain. And yeah. So. But yeah, I think that generally the evidential arguments are going to be the ones you run up against that are tricky. So, got out of a bit of a slump myself, so very happy about that. Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. Yep, sometimes it could be kind of rough to get out of like a rough patch or slump or something bad happens, but I think that ultimately what you find is that things start to normalize out and things become good for a while again. So just enjoy the goodness. Walk outside with a cup of coffee and watch the sunrise for a bit in the morning. Enjoy little things. I've definitely been trying to like just do more in general. I think it helps a lot in life. Personally, I encounter fine-tuning the most these days, or cosmological, but I don't think either work. What is the evidential one specifically? I probably know it, but if not, always happy to hear what's trendy. So yeah, your evidential arguments are going to be like teleological or fine-tuning type arguments. They're going to be arguments of Christology from Christians. So they're going to argue that Jesus existed. People believe that Jesus was God, and people got put to death for believing Jesus to be God. And their ultimate argument is, if people really weren't convinced that he was God, why would they have gone to death if they really didn't see the things that happened? So that's going to be your evidential argument, and it's going to be used by a lot of modern Christians. Yeah, but that doesn't really do much, I imagine. Yeah, I mean, to me it doesn't, but it does make some evidence. Like at the bare minimum, as an atheist, you have to grapple with the fact that there is some evidence for God's existence and some weird things. But I think it's weak, and I don't think it's convincing, but people basically argue. Like there's this dude, I've been watching his show, I forget his name, but he basically goes like, that would mean that Christians have justified true belief, so they should be able to confidently say they have knowledge of God at least. You just don't find their knowledge convincing. So at the bare minimum, it's like, there's some evidence, but not a lot. Evidence is a strong word. Most of it is testimonial. But that's the thing that they argue, right, is that a lot of pre-antiquity history is going to be archaeological and testimonial. That you're not going to have, like, you know, they're basically arguing that there's contemporary pieces confirming Jesus existed. And, like, I think most biblical scholars believe that Jesus existed, but yeah, I think it's weak evidence considering they're claiming that he, like, rose the dead and him himself rose from the dead and did all these wild things. So I have no beef with the idea that Jesus existed or the idea that people died for their belief in God, but I don't think that does much, if anything, for the underlying metaphysical contradictions involved with the King of God they advocate for. But I obviously need to do more research before I just shit on something. Yeah, I think what you'll find from Christians is that they just go, well, we just don't have a logical argument for God yet, or God isn't found in logic, he's found in evidence, is what they're just going to say. And so they're going to keep you on to the evidential argument. Or you're going to run into a straight up presuppositionalist that's just going to be like, well, you have to presuppose God's existence to even use logic, so let's talk about the evidence for God before we start using logic, because I don't believe you can use your logic without God. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely the strategy I've noticed the most from modern Christians. They kind of go like, well, Jesus existed, we have testimonials of his existence, these people claimed he did miracles, it's about as good as a lot of our prehistorical evidence, so therefore you should believe in God. I think that's kind of weak, because I think if you play the evidential game, I think the best response is to point out counter evidence. So, like, a really good example is, like, if the writers of the Gospels really wanted us to think that Jesus was God and God was real, why is there no explicit, like, this is a testimonial of God coming in human form on earth? Why don't they state that in it and sign it, or just be like, yes, I am attesting to the fact that Jesus is God with this. Here is the story of Jesus. Like Matthew, for example, I think whoever wrote Matthew was likely Jewish and was trying to continue the story of the Old Testament. I don't think that they thought that, like, Jesus came to, like, as literally God. I think he kind of viewed Jesus more on the realm of, like, an even greater or equal to, like, Moses or Abraham or Noah. And I think if you read Matthew, it even says in the beginning, I think, that this is a story of the King of the Jews. And I think most scholars agree that it's trying to establish Jesus as King of the Jews, not like this, not like literally God, but a son of God that God sent on his behalf. So I have no reason to think that the writer of Matthew actually believed Jesus was God. Old Testament God is brutal, though. I agree. I think that the biblical view of suffering is really messed up. I think the biblical view of suffering, which is basically what the prophets believed, they believed that, like, all the suffering in the world was just God punishing people for their misgivings or misdeeds. I think it's just absurd. Like, clearly today there are people that do good things that still suffer while doing the good things. Like, a good example is, like, quitting drugs if you're a drug addict. The fact that drugs punish you for quitting them is quite absurd if God wants you to do the right thing. Someone's trying to get their life together, but they could literally die from cold turkey quitting some drugs and alcohol. Like, that's pretty messed up. So it's like you finally go to do good and you suffer for doing that good finally. So you're actually better off to just keep doing the bad thing. It doesn't make sense. And also, if, like, earthquakes and plagues are just sent by God, sure, he's punishing evil people, but certainly he's punishing innocent people. Like, when he flooded the earth, what did the animals do that was so wicked? Like, how the hell is an animal an agent capable of doing something immoral? That just doesn't even make sense to me. Or what the hell did all the unborn babies and all the pregnant women that got drowned do? What did all the newborns do wrong, right? And your common argument is going to be, oh, we're just all born sinners. But that would contradict free will and agency, because if God made us agents and made it so we can make our own decision, it seems like he made it impossible to make the decision to not be a sinner. So it's not our choice to disobey God. God just makes us disobey him, which would be evil. It's basically God's forcing us to do bad things just to torture us. And that's obviously not all good. That's not what an all good God ought do, is torture people for the sake of it. So yeah, I think the old view sucks, and is very hard to defend. I think Christians have come up with a new view that gets a little bit trickier. It's called the apocalyptic view. I actually put it in a document that I have. Basically, the apocalyptic view, let me find it here. Here it is. Apocalyptic view of suffering. it's basically like God's not causing the suffering. It's Satan's causing the suffering and all the wicked. So, like, um, this view is held by many well-read New Age Christians that states that the evil on earth is caused by the devil and those who reject God's commands and worship the devil instead. This view would state that the devil and all of his followers and non-believers use their agency to bring about suffering. So basically the devil fucks with us because it's fun for the devil. And then the wicked people cause wars and stuff because they're wicked and follow the devil or do bad things. And all of his followers and non-believers use their agency to bring about that suffering. The devil would have the power to cause sickness, drought, and famine, while the wicked can cause human suffering like war and corruption. This view used the New Testament as a basis by stating Jesus came to save us from our sins, so that when we are tempted by the devil, we can ask for forgiveness and be saved anyways. Also assumes through the book of Revelation that the apocalypse is coming one day and Jesus will battle Satan and save all the righteous and defeat the wicked for good. Which that argument is a little bit trickier on the face of it, because it's like, okay, if this is the case, people are actively bringing about bad stuff. But that argument, I think, starts to fall apart because there are innocent people that get caught up in the wickedness. And I think the only way you could hold that people have a choice in suffering is that you would have to say that God shelters good people from suffering, but that doesn't appear to be the case. There appears to be plenty of good people that suffer. So it appears that either God has abandoned people or God just wants every single person to suffer. So, and that's not what an all good God ought do. Still runs into the problem of divine hiddenness as well. Yeah, I think it makes it hard to prove that divine revelation occurs to everyone if, like, the world is innately suffering, so there's no, like, goodness that can be granted to anyone ever for doing good things, like, other than by people. So, yeah, I think that there's plenty of issues with it. I think it's a little bit tricky. No reason why God would deprive someone of developing a relationship with him if he was all living. Yeah, that's also weird. Like, why did God purposely harden Pharaoh's heart in Exodus and make it so that, Pharaoh was going to say no to releasing the Jews? It seems like he wanted to just fuck up the Egyptians for the fun of it. Which seems fairly fucked up. Like, yes, if someone did something bad to someone, like, yeah, you kind of have, like, a vengeful spirit, but, like, making it so that it's going to happen to them no matter what, I feel like is evil. But I also think that this is an interesting argument. I think that Christians can't have objective morality. Only an atheist can reason to objective reality. Objective morality. Like, I think if God did exist and he commands me to do things, why ought I listen to what God says? I don't think that there's a universal reason to listen to what God says, even if he existed. So I think that the morality would still be subjective. You would have to make a subjective choice to listen to God. And there's no objective reason you ought to do that. So, while an atheist, I think, could say, we are agents, agency is self-evidently valuable, so therefore you ought value agency. And you can demonstrate it. I'm a moral realist, but these days moral realism amongst atheists is super controversial. Everyone is opting for emotivism these days, but that is an interesting angle. I've never heard that before. Yeah, I think it's straight up impossible to have objective morality if you believe in God. I think I even have the argument written down. It goes like, I have this whole document of arguments that I've been thinking of, but like, um, where is it? I think it's one of the first ones I did. Yep, moral realism. If morality is objective, God cannot exist. Otherwise stated, religious people cannot have objective morality. Proposition 1, if agents exist, they will always have a reason to do or not to do something, otherwise known as an ought. For morality to be objective, all agents must have self-evident oughts. Proposition 3, there are self-evident oughts, therefore morality is real or objective. Either God simply commands us to be good or God makes us do good. If God makes us be good, there is no agency other than God's agency, and without agency, there is no morals. Basically, if you're not an agent, you can't intentionally do something. There's no reason to do something. So there's no ought. So there can't be morality. If God commands us to be good, there is no self-evident ought or reason to follow God's commands. Without universal oughts, there is no morals. Religious people cannot have objective morality. So yeah, I think that if God just forces people to do bad or good things, it just pushes agency onto God, and God is always evil and good all the time, which means that he's not all good, or he just simply tells you to do stuff. But if he tells me to do something, I have no reason that's self-evident to do it. So like if he tells me to like, you know, I guess basically anything. Like you could just ask a Christian, like, why ought I care what God says? So, oh yeah, free will under God is very hard to defend, but I am quite skeptical about free will in general. I pretend I have it, but because I like the idea of having free will, but not sure. But Strawson has a cool paper that explains how morality and responsibility still make perfect sense in a world without free will. But cool angle, I've never heard of it before. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know about free will in particular. I think you can have agency without free will, but you can't have free will without agency. So I just hold that we're agents. I don't. I think I'm a necessitarian, so I think that the universe just happens the way that it happens, and there's no way around it. Like it has to occur the way that it does. So that makes it so that free will is open, or essentially like you can make a choice, but it's like being caught on a water slide. Like good luck trying to run back up a active water slide, but like you can kind of slow yourself down, or like you still have a little bit of control, but you're inevitably still part of the water slide. So it's like open free will. But either way, I think agency is just self-evidently the case, because if you say I am not an agent, you are making a decision to say that I am not an agent. So it seems like it's the case. And if you weren't an agent saying I am not an agent, there was no reason for you to do it anyway. You just simply did it. So like why does that statement even matter anyway? So I think we have agency. I don't know about free will. Like maybe, maybe not. I don't think Christians can have free will, period, but I don't think they can have agency at all. Well, they can have agency, they just have to be a Calvinist and say that only God has agency and we're all pawns of God, which I think is absurd. This reminds me of a lot of a paper I read which argues that the idea of thinking I am in a brain in a vat presupposes that you are not a brain in a vat. God, I love philosophy. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I think it's crazy that you could think your way to brute fact. Like, I think I have a defeater for, like, I can't trust my thoughts as well, because in order to not trust your thoughts, you would have to trust the thought, I can't trust my thoughts. So you're presupposing that you can trust a thought, at least one, to not trust any of your thoughts. And if you could trust at least one of your thoughts, it's probably the case that you produce more thoughts that you could trust. So you should probably trust at least some of your thoughts. But yeah, and also in like the not operator in philosophy is self-evident, because in order to say that not does not exist, you have to have the word not to say that not does not exist. So yeah, it's kind of a crazy thing. Just like there's just these things that, like, if you try to think of them not existing, you have to think of them existing. So, and yeah, like the brain in a vat thing, like, yeah, you would have to observe being in the vat, which would suggest that you're not in the vat at some point, at least for a little bit. So, yeah, I think that there's some really cool thought problems. And I think that there's some self-evident problems with a lot of arguments because they just don't try to think of them in terms of brute fact. So, like, I think a good example is the cosmological argument, because I think the cosmological argument fails to the brute fact that time has always existed. I think that if time has always existed, then there's not a universal. God didn't create everything in the universe, at least, so he was at least beholden to time. So if anything, time created God. Same with global skepticism about knowledge. To claim that you know that skepticism is correct, you concede that global skepticism about knowledge is wrong. A lot of philosophy is so obvious, but actually thinking of the obvious things is far harder than one thinks. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. I've been getting quite a few, like, postmodernist types and stuff coming in recently, like, and yeah, I think once you start asking simple questions, it just falls apart and you end up, like, having to run away from it. So yeah, I think people, like, I think that's the issue with presuppositionalism as well. I just read a book from religious thinkers arguing that presuppositionalism's dumb. They were basically arguing that, like, in order to, I think the defeating question was, like, if God did not exist, would the proposition that God does not exist be true? And you're forced to say no. So it's false that God does not exist if God does not exist, which would violate, like, a fundamental law of logic. So, like, you just end up getting into super absurd things really fast. You just end up, like, basically saying non-communicative statements, or end up in a circular argument. So yeah, I think it's kind of cool that you could find, like, fundamental truths. And I think it's really sad that more and more anti-intellectualism's happening and people are, like, just straight up being like, words are just words. A word is just different from another word. I don't know. Which means that logic is just the case because all the words in logic are just different than the other words in logic. I don't know. I think it's just kind of silly. But yeah, I've definitely been running into a lot of people recently that do, like, the Jordan Peterson thing where they go, like, well, what do you mean by the word God? What do you mean by the word what? What do you mean by the word exist? It's like, well, some of these things are self-evident or these things are the case. So, like, I don't know. I think that words have references. And you just start getting absurd if you deny references. Because it's like, what the hell does the word does not mean, or the combo words does not mean if words don't have meaning. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a problem a lot of Christian arguments run into. I think that a lot of their arguments kind of like run into the same problems. They pretend that God grounds stuff, but you end up realizing that it doesn't at all. So, or they're just presupposing things, and then they try to act like everyone has to presuppose everything. Like, I think Van Til called brute facts moot facts was his favorite saying, which is like the dude that arguably started modern presuppositionalism. He was basically like, well, if you find a brute fact, that was a pointless endeavor. But I think that it's self-evident that what he's saying there would require brute fact, that brute facts are not valid. Because otherwise, I guess what he's saying there doesn't make any sense. So I think even presuppositionalists use knowledge and logic whether they want to or not. So I don't know. I think it just kind of runs into some walls, and it's one of the big things I'm going to be focusing on is just like fighting back against some of these like presuppositionalists and some of these like anti-intellectual people. I ran into like a post-structuralist yesterday that was like a post-structuralist socialist. That like money is an invention of the white man or whatever. Like just ideas like this and Christian ideas. Like, I don't know. I think they just need to be looked at very, very cautiously. And I think there's some good things to take away from the continental thinkers and stuff, and like, yes, maybe you have to be careful and be a little bit intellectually humble and don't be overly philosophical about stuff, but I think even they thought that if you take the things that they say literally, it leads to absurdity, which was their point. And I guess that was the point that they were making to philosophers in the West, is just, you know, if you're going to be so arrogant, people are just going to shut off their brains or whatever, and they can just be illogical. So, yeah, I don't know. I think it's just interesting. Like, I think Christology is interesting. A lot of the evidential stuff for God's interesting. I think that I don't know. I think it's all interesting. Academics are very arrogant and unpalatable at times. Doesn't help. Yeah, I think that's what's led to a lot of problems we have in the West right now, is that the academics took it for granted that we all trusted them, and we just knew these things to be true. Like, we all just knew racism was bad. We all just knew that, you know, sexism was bad. We all just knew that slavery was bad. We took all these things for granted. And the academics were like, well, obviously it's the opinion of us that it's the case, so you should just believe it. And it led to where we're at now, because people inevitably did what the continental philosophers warned us of, is they just kind of shut off their brains and went, I don't care. And now we have to fundamentally justify these basic rights again. And so people are genuinely wanting to revoke citizenship and forget why freedom of movement is an important liberal value. And it's important for the West to have freedom of movement. Like, we've just forgotten all these things and taken them for granted because, you know, we're supposed to just take the academics at their words. So, yeah, people inevitably, their response is going to be shut off their brain and become anti-intellectual. So, yeah, I think what, like, Nietzsche and stuff was warning us about, I think, like, the Übermensch was a warning. Like, it's like, you need to use your agency and be a good agent and be a strong, intelligent agent, or someone else is going to come along and create reality for you and just do it. So if we just kind of shut our brains off and like, yep, it's true because academics have believed it forever, then things fall apart. So yeah, I think it's I don't know. I think it's crazy that we've gotten to where we've gotten. People just have forgotten how to argue for basic rights and basic facts about the world. So that's one thing I'm going to work on. I'm going to try to argue points from more like fundamental theory and like explain them from the beginning. Because like the immigration issue, for instance, I think people have just forgotten why freedom of movement is a freedom or a right and why it's important. Because I don't think they realize that's self-evident, because if their parents and themselves weren't granted freedom of movement, they wouldn't be in a position to deny the freedom of movement of others. Because you wouldn't be able to reach these people, or you wouldn't be in the same country as them. So therefore, it's a self-evident right. So I think that a self-evident right is a really, really high burden to break. So I think people have just forgotten these things, and academics are just like, well, we've released all these papers, they should just believe it. Or I've spent all this time studying, you should just believe it. It's just been kind of a downfall of things. So, yep, I think people just have to be prepared to argue fundamentally again. Which I think I'm prepared to do. I think I've done a decent bit of research. And I think I have a better view of studies now as well from philosophy. I think a lot of people misuse studies. I think a lot of people forget that correlation is not causation. And the point of studies is to find a very, very, very strong correlation to help justify causation, but you still need a justification for causation. So, yeah, statistics can be manipulated so much. Absolutely. So, like, if you're going to try to use a study to back your position, you need to show me in that study where the expert is giving a reason for causation, and I'm going to use logic and reasoning to determine if that's a good explanation. So you can't just blindly appeal to authority and be like, look, they found this correlation or this study or this statistic. It's just a misuse of studies. And no one in science does this. If they find correlation in something, you have to do an experiment to prove it. And there's some things you just can't run experiments because it would be unethical. So you ultimately have to use pseudo experiments or like quasi experimental stuff to find out, and you have to come up with theories. So you can argue insane stuff if you're good at stats. Absolutely. I think shark attacks correlate with ice cream consumption, but I think it would be a wild claim to say that eating ice cream causes shark attacks. Bro, I could find awesome regresses between ice cream sales in the UK and death in Nigeria, for example. Knowing how to read stats is next level. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. You ultimately still need to come up with a theory. Like that in particular, the deaths in Nigeria are probably due to heat and dehydration. And like people having to get desperate and drink more bad water because it's hot. So because it's hot outside, more people are eating ice cream and more people are like starving to death and dehydrating to death in Nigeria. Like you have to come up with a reason they correlate. You can't just say that they correlate. So yeah, I think that's oh yeah, obviously I'm just trying to just use an example to make the point of how stats can prove correlations between things that don't belong. Yep. Yep, they absolutely can. Again, same thing with the ice cream and shark attacks, and 100% of people that drink water die. So water causes death. It's like, no, water doesn't make you die. It's just death makes you die, or like your body aging makes you die. It just turns out you need water to live. It's not that the water's killing you. Like, you just have to think about things. So even with that, I think like people do it a lot. Again, immigration's a good one, but yes, the studies point to immigration being good, but ultimately you need a strong theory and need to be prepared to explain why the freedom of movement is something you should care about. And, you know, pretty much any issue, you need to be prepared to explain causation. And if you're not prepared to explain it, if you're going to appeal to authority, you need to show the authority what their reasoning is, not just the causation or the correlation they found. You need to show their reasoning. So I had a project at the end of my third year in econometrics, where I got a really high mark, not because I was any good at the stat software, but because I was able to explain why my results were beyond misleading. I appreciate that lecturer. Without him, I wouldn't have passed. Yeah, I think that that's an ultimate thing that people just forget about the scientific method, is that you need a hypothesis first to test, and then you would just think about the things you would expect to see and do those experiments. Like, you don't just blindly start looking at stats to come up with opinions. And again, I think it's just experts took for granted the internet and people having access to all their studies, and people are just going to use them to do bad stuff or don't know what they're talking about. So I've found that helpful to just basically, if someone's claiming something that doesn't sound right, if you just ask them to show you in the study where it claims causation, they're never going to be able to demonstrate causation. So, or the theory is not going to make sense that they posit. I forget, someone sent me a study the other day that was like that for immigration. It was like someone in the UK, I think, that like sent me a study that like one group of people, it might be like Pakistanis, commit higher amounts of like SA or just general like assaults, I think. And I think I read in that paper, like, they didn't posit any causation at all. They were just kind of like, yep, this is a statistic we found. So, and when I asked that person for causation, they weren't able to give me anything. So, because I think, yeah, your explanation there, you'd have to come up with a reason, and it can't just be, oh, this whole group of people sucks. That doesn't seem right. So I've done some work in causation itself in terms of what causation actually is in the first place, and it's very hard to actually agree upon what a cause is or what it means to be a cause, which complicates matters even further. For example, if you leave on a holiday and come home and your plant is dead, what would you say is the cause of the plant's death? Yeah, that's tricky, because it's like, yeah, you leaving could have killed it, but also it not getting water is what killed it. You know, lack of sunlight could have killed it. You know, what if it was just like cloudy outside, so the window it's set next to wasn't getting enough light? Like, yeah, that's the thing. It's really tricky. I think people just kind of go like, oh, have a study, it's correct, or like just cite talking points. Yeah, I think that so the absence of water caused the plant to die, but what is the absence of water? It's nothing. So nothing caused the plant to die. See where I'm going here? Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting to think about. So nothing made the plant die. Oof. So if you want to say something caused it, then you would just go back to, oh, leaving the house killed the plant, but like literally leaving the house didn't kill the plant. Like you driving down the road didn't kill that plant. And then you could get super fundamental and be like, well, maybe it's just the plant, it's just a passage of time or whatever, and the plant was going to die. Like, huh. Yeah, that's really tricky. Yeah, that's what makes me upset when people misquote studies and stuff or just say, oh, here's my correlation. You need an argument for it. Because, yeah, that's a really good example. But, yeah, I don't know. I think people just take for granted things because we've known them for a while. It's just been the prevailing theory. So academics are just like, yep, you should accept this. So, yeah, we have to kind of work from the beginning again and prove all these things to be true again. Most people would say that because they appeal to counterfactuals. If I had watered it, it wouldn't have died. Therefore, the absence is a cause. I think that's only valuable as an explanation. The literal cause is the atmosphere, which disposes the plant towards dehydration. But this is where everything gets beyond confusion and complicated. Otherwise, I could agree that the fact that the King of England didn't water my plant caused it to die. Yeah. Yeah, I think it gets pretty crazy to try to think of stuff like that. I think it gets really tricky. I think that I don't know. At some point, I think you got to look at studies and look at things and think them through and try to get to brute fact or think about the fact of the matter. I think people just like to shut off their minds and take a shortcut. I think you can't take shortcuts to some of these things. I don't know. I think that's the main thing that I'm focusing on. It's one of the things I want to do is just make sure that people are being intellectual or actually thinking about the things that they're saying and like just generally actually reasoning things and not just pointing out, oh, there's a correlation here, or like, oh, my mind says so, so I believe it. You have to actually think it through and just come to a reasonable conclusion. So that's what I'm most concerned with. And I think it's what's causing a lot of problems. Again, like the other day, I had the socialist that was like, money is just the white man's creation, or like, you know, you get people doing it with immigration a lot, and obviously the existence of God is like that. You just can't just shut off your brain. I have a little bit of correlation, so therefore it's the case. You have to come up with a solid reason, and it needs to hold water. So I guess that ultimately is because I hold to like a cohesion view of knowledge, that it has to be cohesive. I guess I don't hold to an evidential view of knowledge. I guess it's only knowledge if it's cohesive. So I guess that's why I think that. But I think that's just the case, though, because if something's not cohesive, it usually is. I think it's almost always illogical. Oh, shoot. But I don't know. I think it's just people misusing studies, shutting off their brain. Oh my god, I need to stop dropping that. It's probably loud as hell. But yeah, I think that that's one of the main goals. I'm not just gonna do like God doesn't exist all the time. It's gonna be one of the main ones I do. At this point, I'm just concerned about the fundamental views of society right now. So um, I'm gonna try to be a little bit more fundamental or theoretical when talking about things. So there's a few topics I think I'm fairly prepared on that we're going to also do here soon. I think I'm going to do the abortion argument because I think I've given the abortion argument a good thorough thought because I think that I've even tried to come up with like a solid pro-life stance, and I think I eventually found a few issues with it because I had a unique argument for pro-life, or at least I didn't see any papers on it. Because I think pro-life is usually using like a religious view of time, or that like time is just our illusion, or like something God puts in our brain. I don't think people view abortion through like a atheistic perspective. So I tried to come up with a pro-life argument starting with like the B theory of time, that like, you know, I had a paper on it somewhere I started writing, but I don't know, I stopped it, I guess. But yeah, I think I'm quite prepared for the abortion conversation because I tried to give it a good thought through with a pro-life argument side. I think if you, like, my thinking was, is if you adhere to the B theory of time, that would mean that time is just an accident of all things, or like it's just a dimension or property in which all changes of a thing occur. So if that's the case, there wouldn't be a logical reason to not value an embryo the same as a like full-grown person, because the embryo is just on an earlier time state in comparison to the grown person. Like they're the same thing, they're just different time states, so therefore you should value them the same. But I think it kind of eventually just ran into the is-ought problem. So just because it is the case that time or a future state you have is the case, doesn't mean you ought give a crap about it. You still would have to reason why you should care about it, is basically the conclusion that I came towards. So like the pro-choice person in that situation could just be like, okay, it is the case that on this timeline there likely is a full-grown person there. Why ought I care? And you still have to answer the oughts. I think you have to answer the ought with an ought. I don't think you can answer oughts with is. I think it's the same problem that like Christians run into with their morality. I think it's like, if God commands me to do stuff, why ought I listen to it? Just because he commands me to do things, why should I care? Yeah, is ought or naturalistic fallacy, one of the two. Yeah. Like, if it is the case that you possess future states which are valuable, why ought I give a crap? Like, you have to convince me I should care about your future accidents and not your current accidents. Or, like, far future accidents. Or, like, at what point is a future accident worth considering? Like, I just don't think that we ought care about that. I think you should just... I think you ought care about the potential for agency, and that's what you ought care about. Because I think that agency is self-evidently valuable. I don't see how time states are self-evidently valuable. So that's the conclusion I came to with it. But I do think it was really a really tricky argument at first. Because it is like, if you are going to have a future valuable state, it is intuitively at first thought like, oh, that would seem like you have some transferred value now if it's just a property you possess. But I also think it's a question of essence versus accidents. If time is an accident, I don't know if we value accidents, or valuing accidents is something you should do. Like, for instance, race is an accident. Should I value certain races more than others? Probably not. Racism's bad. I don't see why I should do that. So if I shouldn't care about that accident, why should I care about your time accident? So, yeah, it would seem like we value essence of things, not accidents of things, or not traits of things. So, like, I value or do not value a rock because of the essence of the rock, not because the fact that, like, the rock is, like, gray, or because the rock is small, or the rock is large, or the rock in the future possesses a future accident of being crushed. I ought not care. I think I just ought not care about the rock because I don't. You shouldn't care about rocks because they have nothing for you to care about. So, I think that's the conclusion I came to. So if someone was ever to come up with that argument, which I don't think they will, because I'm pretty sure that was a unique argument that I came up with. I didn't see it online anywhere. I didn't even see it on Reddit. So, like, I don't think that, you know, I didn't see it in some random forum somewhere. I didn't see it in any sort of fill papers. Like, I don't know. Essence is very difficult, though. A lot of stuff I'm doing now is tied to essence, and while essence makes a lot of sense intuitively, it's really hard to make sense of it in the philosophical sense in the first place. Are essences real in the first place? If they are, what can we not tie to essences? But in general, what you have said so far, I'm inclined to agree with. Yeah, like, that's the thing. Like, I think intuitively essence is there, and whatever that essence is more what we seem to value. Like, we value a person for the essence of them being a person, not because of the properties of them being a person. Because I feel like it just leads to some very bad situations. Like, you end up devaluing people because, like, their hair is a different color, like, their eyes are a different color, like, their skin's a different color. I think a person is what's being valued, or the essence of that. And who knows, maybe you could say that person is a property and not the essence. But then if that's the case, the property I think that we're valuing, or the only one you should value, is the concept of person, not the concepts of anything else. So, but yeah, I don't know. I tried to come up with a pro-life argument. I don't think it worked. I think it's just the is-ought problem. I think it reaches the same issue. Like, I don't know. I think I'm inclined to say that abortion is fine as so long as the probability for an agent is low enough. Okay, but what defines personhood? And yeah, if we speak of something's in essence, are we potentially speaking of a fundamental property of the thing? I'm just pushing back for the sake of it, by the way, not because I agree or disagree. No, yeah, I've thought of these responses too. I think the only property we truly value, or when we use the word person, I think we're referring to agency, or being an agent. And that might just be a property of, like, mind, or we might be talking about minds, or personal minds. Like, I think if you want to get super fundamental, I think the only thing you can find oughts from is agency, or the ability to intentionally do something, or reasoning. I think that's where value derives from. So, like, personhood, I think we're inevitably referring to the probability of agency. Because, like, we wouldn't grant a cow personhood, because it seems like a cow's nervous system and mind doesn't have the same potential for agency. Okay, so close to Kantian reasoning, but rather than respect tied to agency, but perhaps the one requires the other. Yeah, yeah, I would say that my ethical system combines three ethical systems. It combines contractarianism. I meant reason, not respect. Oh yeah. Okay, so close to Kantian reasoning, but rather than reasoning tied to agency, but perhaps one requires the other. Yeah, I would say reasoning is inevitably found within agency. I'd say I'm combining virtue ethics from Aristotle. Things like I think virtue ethics stands pretty good. Like you ought be a good evaluator of your own life, because how could you evaluate others' lives if you can't successfully evaluate your own life? I think that's a pretty good virtue. I think it's combining things like that from virtue ethics with Kantian reasoning or categorical imperatives, where like you must have a universal ought, not just like a generally accepted ought. It must be universally reasoned to. And then I think I'm kind of combining it with contractarianism, which is kind of like the Thomas Hobbes view or John Lockean view, that like as long as rational agents exist, they will inevitably come to the conclusion that they need to make contracts with other agents. So I think I'm kind of meshing all three. Like when I try to think of things, I try to think of them as uniquely as I can. I try not to just like blindly say, oh, I'm a virtue ethicist or whatever. I think I'm kind of combining those three things. I don't think you can combine Aristotelian ethics with constructivist Kantian framework. The two are by nature in conflict with one another in a broader sense. I'm very pro-Aristotle myself. Kant offers a rule-based ethics, which Aristotle just rejects at core. They can overlap, but the overlaps are by accident, not because of agreement in the system. Does that make sense? Yeah, that makes sense. I think the parts where they overlap, I don't know. It's hard to describe my ethical system. I might be closest to a virtue ethicist, or maybe just a contractarian. That might be the simplest way to put my views. Because I actually think ethics has two forms. I think that there's individual ethics and societal ethics. So it gets kind of tricky. So both would be tied to reason, but the one is tied to reason as a way of becoming whole, while the other is reason tied to following a rule. Yeah, I don't know. It's tricky to say which one I hold. I just basically start with agency is self-evidently valuable, because in order to state you should not value agents requires all the other agents around you to respect your agency, and allow you to use your agency to say that agency is not valuable. So I don't know either, bro. This shit is hard. Yeah. Meta ethics is tricky, but I think I found a few universal oughts. Like I think I found like the one I just explained. I think that, you know, I think maybe that is just contractarianism that I'm describing. Like in order for society to function, all rational agents have to come together to agree on contracts. And I guess I use some evidentialism with it. I guess I use mimetic evolution or societal evolution to back it. And that a society that sucks is going to be just taken over by a society that's better, or the society is going to suck so bad people are just going to rebel, and change the social contract and establish a new society. So I guess I'm a contractarian, I guess is the simplest way of putting it. So I guess the only fact of the matter, I assume, is that we are agents And then from that agency, we're inevitably going to develop contracts. These contracts entail rights or entitlements. And so you're going to commit a wrong by violating a contract or an entitlement or right. You sound into moral realism if you want a cool book on it, which is really well researched as well. Reed Schaefer, Lando, Moral Realism, A Defense. I don't agree with his version, but he covers so much you get a full picture of meta-ethics from the book. I'll have to add it to the reading list. I'm currently reading The Greatest Show on Earth. Well, I'm reading God's Problem, which is a book by Bart Ehrman, who's like a theologian who's basically talking about the problem of suffering and using the Bible as defense of the problem's existence. And then I need to read a bit more about evolution in general. Like, I've read a little bit, but I'll have to add it to the list. So let me put that in the wish list. No rush, just a suggestion. If you get to it, is up to you. Reading is hard, and there's only so much you could read. Yeah, and I'm trying to read the Bible like way more in depth. I'm trying to like read and reread it again and again, so that way I can like be very well read against modern like Christian evidentialism. And like, I don't know, like my current reading is I read like several chapters of the books of the Old Testament, and then I read several chapters of the New Testament, particularly the Gospels, the book of Acts, and the book of Romans, because that's where Jesus is talked about the most. And then I have to then read the regular book I want to read, which I'm trying to read God's Problem right now. And then I've got a copy of The Greatest Show on Earth, which is basically a defense of evolution. I need to read that. So the next thing up might be meta-ethics. Yeah, you're a better man than me. I don't have the time to do that or desire personally, but it is important to be well informed on Scripture if you want to be taken seriously within the debate. Yeah, it gets very tricky because, yes, I think that you could just do a little bit of research and have a couple scriptures in your back pocket that point out what you want to say, but inevitably someone's just going to point to some other book, or they're going to start being super bad faith and they're going to be like, well, the original translation of the Torah has the word halam describing this, which doesn't mean beat, it means serve to, or they're going to do some shit like that. So you do have to be pretty well read anymore, because most people are going to evidentialism, so it's like... And even, I think a lot of the modern Christian theologians are actively encouraging people, don't argue without Scripture. Like, argue the validity of the Scripture. That's the only thing that matters. So, I'm well-versed in philosophy of religion, so the metaphysics behind things, but not Scripture. Against a strong theist, I could get cooked in a debate. Especially with the shift towards evidentialism, as you've mentioned. Yeah. You definitely, modern debates are very evidentialist. Like, they are, you got to be prepared to know some Greek words for the New Testament, some Aramaic words, or Hebrew words for the Torah. So, yeah, it gets really tricky. I would recommend... if you don't want to read the whole like Bible, you could read Bart Ehrman. He's a he's a theologian, so he studies the Bible. He's a New Testament scholar, so he's really well read in terms of Christology. He has a couple books on Jesus's existence and why people claimed him to be God. I would recommend those because he gives scripture in it, but he just gives like the relevant bits you need. He doesn't like go through the books that aren't usually mentioned, so you don't have to read the whole Bible. And he gives you that scripture that he's talking about. And he has very easy to read books. Like he does a good job not overcomplicating stuff. So it's going to be Bart Ehrman. It's Bart D. Ehrman. The book I'm reading right now is, where is it? God's Problem. This one. If I gather the motivation to read outside of work and studies, I'll give it a go. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. If you read God's Problem, I think that it'll. That's probably the only one you need to read. His other stuff's good. The Apocalyptic Prophet's a good one, and Misquoting Jesus is good, but because misquoting Jesus is even a really good one, because then you're prepared. A lot of people will misquote Jesus as saying stuff he never said, so like you're prepared to argue against things that Christians say that are just flat out false. In God's Problem, he's mostly talking about the scripture defense of suffering. That if you were to use scripture and scripture only, you would be forced to say that God causes all suffering, or Satan causes all suffering and the wicked, and God just kind of hangs out and lets it happen because one day he's going to come back and like smite the devil or whatever. Which is already wacky in itself, because it's like the God has to smite the devil. Does he not have the power to just like snap him out of existence? Doesn't seem very all powerful, but like, yeah, it just gets kind of wacky. Yeah, but God also allowed for Satan's existence itself, so that is weird. Yeah, but the response becomes, it's like, oh, it's free will. Free will in itself is where morality comes from. And so if God needs to be all good, he has to let you have the ability to make decisions, including Satan. But like, clearly he's not consistent in that, because he wipes people off the earth for failing to use their agency properly. So why he wouldn't just do that to the devil doesn't make sense, but that's the common response you're going to get, is God has to let us work stuff out. Otherwise, he would be like a dictator, and that wouldn't be very good of him. So, a kid dying of cancer is because of free will, I guess. Yeah, and that's another argument, is the free will argument. And there's actually, Bart Ehrman gives a really cool response to it. If you ask a Christian, does free will exist in heaven? So like when you die and go to heaven, will you still have agency and free will? If they answer yes, that means that God has the ability to create a space in which we use our free will only for good. He just chooses to not do it on earth. So it kind of disproves the free will argument. Like, heaven can't exist, and the free will argument makes sense. Now, if we just simply died, and like we didn't have a soul or whatever, God didn't give us a soul, we just kind of died, the free will argument would make more sense, because you wouldn't have evidence of another plane of existence where free will could work. So we would just have to assume that God has to leave free will the way it is. So, yeah, it basically means that God's able to give us free will. At least someone and somewhere could give someone the ability of free will. I don't even, that's kind of a misspeak. He has the ability to create a plane of existence where free will can be used good. So, that also potentially opens the door for heaven to include evil. Never heard of this before. Super cool objection. You're very well read, man. I appreciate it. Yep. That one comes from Bart Ehrman. I can't take credit for that one. But when I heard it, I was like, ooh, I've never even thought of that before. Like, the very existence of heaven means that free will can't cause evil, because if it did, that would mean that heaven has evil in it or suffering in it. Which, if you believe that it doesn't, and heaven's this like glorious place of eternal happiness, then, you know, it's just kind of silly. Like, so Earth could have been heaven in the first place. Yeah, that's essentially the argument. Is like, if God has the ability to create a bunch of people with free will that do good things or know how to use it, then that would mean that he could have done the same thing on Earth. He just chose not to. So you would have to be a Calvinist and reject free will altogether and basically say that we're just pawns. Unless heaven has no free will. Yep. So if heaven has free will, Earth having free will has nothing to do with suffering, is basically the argument. As simple as possible. So, yeah, when I heard that, I'm like, ooh, that's pretty cool. I've never heard of that one before. Yeah, it's basically like God would have to be either not making us agents, or God would have to be just choosing to not make Earth heaven for some reason, which doesn't seem like God's all good at that point. Yeah, I like that. It's super strong. Yeah. I think it's just a straight up disproof of the supernatural. And here's also a weird one. If heaven exists, it means that God gives you no option to die. If God gives you no option to die, that would suggest that you really don't have free will. Because you're doomed to live forever. You have no choice in the matter. When people join in chat here, do you find more people that are arguing against you or other atheists? On Twitch, I also stream on YouTube. On YouTube, I find more religious people. On Twitch, I find more atheists. Or I find like the Jordan Peterson type religious people that I don't think are actually religious. They're just kind of like not wanting to admit that they're not religious. So like they do the thing where like, oh, what does the word God mean? Or you don't know what you mean when you say the word God. And then usually, like it happened earlier in the stream, like I had someone like that come in. If you just say, well, okay, whatever you think that word means is what I mean. Do you have anything to say about it? They usually just say cringe, lol, and leave. So that's the type of theist I run into on Twitch more. And YouTube, I run into more like religious people. I actually wrote a poem about this idea. Someone has the desire to die, but then finds himself in heaven. It almost feels locked in eternity's spell, which is more painful than the life he wanted to escape in the first place. But yeah, Twitch seems more atheist. TikTok seems to be the place if you want to find more theists to debate. Yeah, I find more people on like YouTube Shorts and YouTube streaming as well. I don't find as many people on Twitch. I do find a lot of like socialists on Twitch and like postmodernists who I disagree with on Twitch. So, which I don't mind debating them either, because I think some of their philosophy is a little bit wacky, but you know, that's what I find more. Like people tend to get offended at my beliefs I post. On Twitch and on YouTube, they tend to be more actual theists or like either Christian or Muslim. And I think TikTok does the same thing, but YouTube and TikTok overlap quite a bit, but yes, also a lot of socialists on Twitch. I'm potentially one of them myself, but I'm chill and never get hostile about disagreement. Well, like, I don't fundamentally, like, it sounds like you hold more of like a realist view, so you would hold more of like the traditional Marxian view. I don't know if I'm like innately opposed to that because I think Karl Marx still accepted agency. Like, that was his whole point, is we as agents are going to do what's good for us. So this money thing is going to inevitably lead us to do selfish things. I think there's some truth in that. Um, so I don't think it's like completely illogical to be like a traditional Marxist in all senses, but I think to be a post Marxist or post structuralist socialist who basically thinks that capitalism determines all your thoughts, and like the only reason why you know the word like yes or no or true or false is because the white man implanted your brain, I think is really silly. Um, and I just don't find that convincing. So those are usually the type, like, you get the absolutely radical types on Twitch. You're gonna get your legitimate like Leninists, or like not just Marxists, but like full on Leninists, like they like communist China, that sort of thing. Which that's the sort of people I end up arguing with. Like, I probably, like, I would consider myself a social liberal, so like I would adopt a few things of Marx, and like we have to be careful with overly rich people because especially bad rich people have the ability to create quite a lot of suffering. So you have to be careful with these people. But I think like true socialists end up getting in some really wacky stuff. At least if you hold consistent to not just what Marx believed, but like the post-Marxist stuff. I'll be honest, there are aspects where I need to concede and admit to a lack of knowledge. I guess my qualms are more tied to capitalism insofar as I feel very passionate about education specifically and having that which you need to be able to succeed as a student within the domain of education. Yeah, like that's the thing. I accept some parts of socialism, but I think that they still fall within the liberal framework. I think if you look at like socialist streamers and socialist thought leaders, they're innately antithetical to liberalism. Like, they're basically saying like the very nature of democracy is evil. It's corrupted by capitalism. You can't have democracy if capitalism exists. Or they like fundamentally reject agency, and they think that you're not an agent, you're just a product of, fuck, I dropped something. You're just a product of capitalism, which I think is a little bit silly, but I think what Marx was getting at is more like, like dialectical materialism is basically people act in their own interest. If they act in their own interest, capitalism allows them to like put down others to take more for their own interest. So, which I think there is an aspect to capitalism where that's the case. Which is why you need liberal thought and you need an authority to step in, and you need a rule of law to stop these people from like using their wealth and stepping on others and depriving them of basic stuff. But I think that most socialists would hear what I just say and call me like a right-wing jack-off, which is actually what happened to me yesterday. I put a couple clips up on the YouTube channel. I had a socialist chatter come in that was literally like, the only reason why you know what an agent is because you're a white man. It's like, well, okay. If that's the case, what do you mean by the word you? What do you mean by the word no? Because those are all white man words. I've come to feel little about the theory behind these ideas. I just want a system where everyone has the opportunity to receive education. Here, I'm also coming from an African perspective, So most people don't get to go to school at all, and I have issues with that. Yeah, I think that's a very good concern, and I think that yeah, I think that's a good thing to strive for, and I think it's something you can take from socialists. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think where socialism becomes an issue, and the people I disagree with, is just like I guess like the Hassan types, Hassan Piker, like any of these people that like fundamentally become like Leninists, or like think that any belief in capitalism is like, or like any belief that you have is just a capitalistic product, I think just gets silly. And you need like the equivalent of the Chinese Communist Party to come in and tell you, basically shut down democracy so we stop this capitalism thing, I think is kind of wild. But I don't know. I'm not like innately opposed. I actually used to be a socialist. I'm just not anymore. So I was certainly capable of being convinced of it. But also, I think what I just realized is that I was mostly just a liberal who was just convinced I was a socialist. So I don't know. I don't really have a problem with socialists. The only problem that I have is usually when they like fundamentally reject participation in government and doing anything, and just kind of like, well, it's all just capitalist bullshit anyway. It's like, well, no, I actually want to live in a world that doesn't suck, so I'd like to fix stuff and not just be like, well, it's doomed until we revolt. So I don't know. It just kind of depends on the person and the socialists. There's some socialists that are well read and I think have some decent views, but ultimately the ones I run into, especially on Twitch, are usually quite radical. So they're not going to be like a representation of like your normal well-read socialist. So that's also, I'm probably have just ran into too many of those types of people. You're good, man. I obviously have some strong socialist leanings, but I'm not someone who's going to shit on you for disagreeing or claim that I'm right. As long as we all operate in good faith, I'm happy to engage. Yep. And that's what matters. I think people just need to be like just good faith and intellectual nature, and things work themselves out. Ultimately, the titles I'm not as concerned about. It's usually as long as you're not claiming something deeply absurd, I'm cool with it. So, and I wish that was the case everywhere. So that's my ultimate goal, is for that to be the case. So we will work to make it the case. So, ouch. But yeah, I don't know. I think that yeah, I think I'm done streaming for the day. I'm at my 3 hour mark. That's what I'm trying to stream each day as much as possible. So, yeah, I think I'm going to wrap up the stream. I appreciate everyone that came out. Yeah, I enjoyed the chat. I have to head out. All the best. Hope to run into you again. Yep, it was good talking to you. I think I'm going to be wrapping up the stream. Thanks to everyone that came out, and have a good one, and stay